In the spring of 2024, a 13-year-old homeschooled girl in Arkansas began receiving text messages from a man she had never met. Her mother had allowed her to spend time with trusted family friends to escape the stress of caring for her dying grandfather. One of those friends was dating 66-year-old Michael Fostler, a man whose resume read like a pillar of the community: military veteran, former police chief in Indiana, former school resource officer. The kind of background that inspires confidence, that suggests safety. But behind that veneer of respectability, Fostler harbored intentions that would shatter a family and expose catastrophic failures in a system designed to protect the vulnerable. This is a story about grooming, about a justice system that released a predator on minimal bond, and about a father forced to make an impossible choice. It's also a story about what happens when institutions fail, when badges and titles shield monsters, and when the law punishes those who protect their children more harshly than those who prey upon them. Before we examine how this nightmare unfolded, subscribe if you appreciate deeply researched true crime documentaries that prioritize facts over sensationalism, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Aaron Spencer's daughter was a quiet child, helpful and responsible beyond her years. At 13, she was not only managing her schoolwork, but assisting her mother, Heather, in the exhausting daily care of her grandfather, who was in decline. The family recognized the toll this was taking on a young girl who should have been thinking about friends and hobbies, not hospice routines. So Heather made what seemed like a reasonable decision. She allowed her daughter to spend time with people they considered safe, family friends who could offer her a break from the heavy atmosphere at home. Among these family friends was someone dating Michael Fostler. Fostler's background would have reassured any parent. He had served in the military, a sacrifice that commands respect. He had been a police chief, a position that requires trust from an entire community. He had worked as a school resource officer, a role specifically designed to protect children in educational settings. On paper, Fostler represented authority, experience, and stability. In reality, he was systematically identifying and isolating a victim. Fostler obtained the girl's phone number, and the grooming process began with a simplicity that is chilling in retrospect. Text messages. Casual at first, perhaps building familiarity, eroding boundaries. Grooming is not a sudden act. It is a methodical process, a predator's patient investment in breaking down a child's defenses. By July of 2024, the girl was 14, and she had confided in a family member that she had been sexually assaulted. When that family member informed Aaron and Heather, the parents immediately asked their daughter what had happened. She told them about Fostler, a man they were not familiar with, despite his connection to their circle. She said he had assaulted her sexually multiple times. The Spencers did what parents are told to do. They turned to the authorities. They were promised that the matter would be taken seriously, that Fostler would be held accountable. For a brief moment, it seemed the system would work. Fostler was quickly arrested. The charges filed against him were extensive and damning. 2 counts of internet stalking, 2 counts of 4th-degree sexual assault, 2 counts of sexual indecency with a child, possession of a computer with inappropriate material involving children, and 35 counts of pandering or possessing media depicting sexual conduct with a child. This was not a case of ambiguous evidence or conflicting accounts. The charges painted a clear picture of a serial predator, someone who had not only assaulted a child, but had engaged in a broader pattern of exploiting minors. The Spencer family, despite their trauma and fear, likely felt some relief. Fostler was in custody. The justice system was in motion. But what happened next reveals a systemic failure that would have deadly consequences. A judge reviewed Fostler's case and set bail at $5,000 in cash, $5,000, for a man facing dozens of charges related to child sexual abuse. No electronic monitoring, no supervision, just a cash bond and a no-contact order. The Spencer family was nervous, understandably so, but they believed that the weight of felony charges and the legal prohibition against contact would keep Fostler away. They were wrong. The no-contact order was a piece of paper, the bail conditions were toothless, and Fostler, freed with minimal financial consequence, was not deterred. Meanwhile, Heather enrolled her daughter in therapy, trying to help her process the trauma while still caring for her dying father. The family was managing an almost unbearable convergence of crises: a child recovering from sexual assault, an elderly family member in his final days, and the constant anxiety that the man who had hurt their daughter was out there, unmonitored, unrestrained. On October 8, 2024, at approximately 1:12 in the morning, Aaron and Heather were awakened by their dog barking. It was the kind of alert that signals something wrong, an intrusion, a disturbance. Heather immediately asked Aaron to check on their daughter. They went to her room and found it empty. Their 14-year-old daughter was gone. Heather called 911 while the rest of the family searched the house, hoping she had simply moved to another room, hoping for any explanation other than the one forming in their minds. Then Aaron received a text message from his sister. The message included a photo, a Cash App payment for DoorDash from Michael Fostler to Aaron and Heather's daughter sent a day or two before. The implications were immediate and horrifying. Fostler had been in contact with their daughter despite the no-contact order. He had sent her money, and now she was missing. Aaron did not wait for the police to arrive. He grabbed his keys, got into his vehicle, and began searching for his daughter, driven by a terror that only a parent can understand. Before law enforcement could respond, Aaron spotted a white Ford F-150 turning onto Highway 236 East, heading toward the area where Fostler lived. Aaron recognized the vehicle, or perhaps recognized the threat it represented. He turned around and gave chase, flashing his lights, honking his horn, attempting to force the driver to pull over. At the intersection of Highways 236 East and 13 North, Aaron rammed his truck into the rear of Fostler's F-150, sending it into a ditch. Aaron exited his vehicle with his firearm drawn. He ordered Fostler out of the vehicle and commanded him to lie down in the ditch. Then Aaron saw his daughter trying to exit the passenger side of the F-150, but it appeared that Fostler reached over and grabbed her, preventing her from getting out. Aaron shouted again for Fostler to exit the vehicle. Fostler complied, but he had something in his hand. Aaron could not identify what it was in the darkness, in the chaos, in the seconds that decide life and death. Fostler lunged toward Aaron, shouting an obscenity. Aaron reacted. He struck Fostler with his pistol, then fired multiple times. Fostler collapsed, fatally wounded by gunshot wounds to the chest, arms, and abdomen. Aaron, once he was certain the threat had ended, retrieved his daughter from the vehicle, returned to his own truck and called 911 to report what had just happened. When investigators arrived and reconstructed the scene, they confirmed Aaron's account of the shooting. They documented Fostler's wounds, the position of the vehicles, the evidence of the confrontation. It seemed clear that Aaron had acted to stop a man who was abducting his daughter in direct violation of a court order, a man who had already sexually assaulted her multiple times, a man who was fleeing toward an unknown destination with a 14-year-old child in the middle of the night. Had Aaron not intercepted Fostler, his daughter might never have been seen again. Most people who heard the story saw Aaron as a hero, a father who had done what any parent would do when faced with the unthinkable. But the state of Arkansas saw it differently. Aaron Spencer was charged with first-degree murder. The charge was later downgraded to second-degree murder with a firearm enhancement, but the message was clear. The state believed Aaron had committed a crime. Fostler, it turned out, had other victims. Accusations against him dated back to 2022 after his wife of 44 years passed away. He had continued offending, targeting children, and despite the reports, despite the evidence, he had been allowed to remain free to continue his predation. No justice had been served in those earlier cases. The system had failed repeatedly, and now it was prosecuting the man who had stopped Fostler permanently. The irony was grotesque. The judge assigned to oversee Aaron's murder trial was Barbara Elmore, the same judge who had set Fostler's bail at $5,000 with no supervision. Judge Elmore also issued a gag order in the case, preventing the defendant, attorneys, law enforcement, and potential witnesses from speaking about the case. She sealed the entire court file. The move was highly unusual, and many legal observers called the gag order unconstitutional, an overreach that violated First Amendment protections and obstructed public oversight of the judicial process. Before the gag order took effect, Aaron's attorneys, Aaron Castanelli and Michael Kaiser of Little Rock released a statement defending their client. They argued that Aaron was not a criminal for protecting his child from a predator who had repeatedly violated her. The statement was measured but forceful, asserting that Aaron's actions were justified, that he had acted in the defense of his daughter's life and safety. Shortly after the attorneys spoke publicly, Judge Elmore implemented the gag order. The timing suggested that the judge was responding directly to the defense's public comments, attempting to silence criticism and control the narrative around the case. On May 29, 2025, the Arkansas Supreme Court vacated Judge Elmore's broad gag order. Several justices filed unusually strong concurrences, criticizing how the case was being handled. One justice explicitly urged that the case be reassigned to a different judge, arguing that Judge Elmore's involvement created the appearance of a conflict of interest and undermined public confidence in the judicial process. However, the court rejected the motion for reassignment, and Judge Elmore remains the presiding judge on Aaron Spencer's murder case. As of now, the pre-trial hearing is scheduled for December 17, 2025, with a jury trial set to begin on January 26th and conclude on January 30th, 2026. Other judges have been openly critical of Judge Elmore's decision to implement such a broad and restrictive gag order. Legal scholars have noted that the order was unconstitutionally vague, that it could prohibit the speech of public officials, and that it reflected a troubling pattern of attempts to shield the case from public scrutiny. Heather Spencer has stated that more than $100,000 was raised for her husband's legal defense in less than a week, a testament to the public's support for Aaron and their outrage at his prosecution. Any additional funds raised will be donated directly to the Wade Knox Children's Advocacy Center, an organization dedicated to supporting child abuse victims. The Spencer case raises fundamental questions about self-defense, parental rights, and the responsibilities of the justice system. Was Aaron acting in self-defense when he shot Michael Fostler? Or is the state justified in prosecuting him for second-degree murder? These are not abstract legal questions. They are deeply personal, rooted in a father's desperation, a daughter's trauma, and a system that failed to protect her when it had the chance. In October of 2024, while Aaron Spencer awaited trial in Arkansas, another crime unfolded in Michigan that exposed a different kind of predation: the exploitation of trust through deception. Hussein Abdu Murray, known to friends and family as Sam, was born in 1952 in Lebanon. As a child, he immigrated to the United States and eventually graduated from Hamtramck High School. He built a life in Michigan, marrying a woman named Linda, and by the age of 72 they were living quietly in Rochester Hills, a suburban community north of Detroit. Sam was an avid cook, a devoted grandfather, and a passionate gardener who took pride in sharing the fruits and vegetables he grew with friends and family. His grandson, named after him, described Sam as a man with a heart of gold, someone who treated everyone around him with kindness and compassion. The Murrays owned two businesses, Golden Glitter Jewelry in Hamtramck and a luxury pawn shop specializing in jewelry. Their success was modest but real, the result of decades of hard work. On the evening of October 11, 2024, at 10 o'clock, two men rang the doorbell at the Murray residence. They identified themselves as DTE utility workers, claiming they were checking for a gas leak in the neighborhood. DTE Energy is the primary utility provider in southeastern Michigan, and it is not unusual for workers to conduct safety checks, especially if there are reports of gas odors or infrastructure concerns. But it was late, and Sam and Linda were cautious. They declined to let the men in, telling them it was too late and asking them to return the next day. The men left without argument. The following day, October 12th, the same two men returned. This time, Sam and Linda, perhaps reassured by the daylight or convinced by the men's persistence, allowed them to enter. The men said they needed to check the basement for the source of the gas leak. Sam, trusting and accommodating, led them downstairs. Once in the basement, the two men revealed their true intentions. They bound Sam with duct tape and began beating him. The assault was brutal and sustained. Sam, 72 years old, was helpless against two younger attackers. They beat him to death in his own basement. The men then went upstairs to Linda. They demanded money, jewelry, and the location of the safe. Linda immediately asked where her husband was. The men told her he was asleep, but Linda noticed blood on their clothing. She began screaming. One of the men struck her and tried to cover her mouth to silence her. They bound Linda with duct tape, just as they had bound Sam, and then they ransacked the home. They took her phone, her watch, cash, and jewelry. When they had taken what they wanted, they left in a white truck with a DTE sign affixed to the side, a prop designed to legitimize their presence in the neighborhood. Linda, terrified and injured, managed to free herself from the duct tape and called the police. When officers arrived, she told them she believed her husband had been kidnapped. She did not yet know he was dead in the basement. Officers searched the home and found Sam's body. He had suffered extensive injuries, bruises, lacerations, and wounds consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was asphyxia due to neck compression, meaning Sam had been strangled or choked during the assault. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. This was not a random act of violence, it was a planned home invasion carried out with calculated deception. Police immediately focused on the two men who had posed as DTE workers. Ring doorbell footage from the Murray residence provided clear images of the suspects. Investigators used facial recognition technology and cross-referenced the images with existing law enforcement databases. They identified the suspects as Carlos Hernandez and Joshua Zuazo. Hernandez was captured the next day in Shreveport, Louisiana, over 1,000 miles from the crime scene, suggesting he had fled immediately after the murder. Zuazo was located and arrested 3 days later in Plymouth Township, Michigan, not far from the original crime scene. Both men were charged with first-degree murder and 2 counts of unlawful imprisonment. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Hernandez's wife had been involved in the planning stages of the crime. Text messages between Hernandez and his wife revealed discussions about counterfeit DTE materials. In one message, she wrote, "The badges were delivered. Your account is still negative." The reference to badges indicated that they had purchased fake DTE identification to make their disguise more convincing. In another text, she asked, "What if he's not home?" Hernandez replied, "He will be." The exchange suggested that they had conducted surveillance on the Murrays, that they knew Sam's routines, and that they had planned the attack with precision. In yet another message, Hernandez's wife wrote, "I'm so nervous, but you guys seem to have it down. I feel better now that you have a good getaway car." The texts painted a picture of premeditated murder, of a conspiracy that involved not just the 2 men who entered the home, but also Hernandez's wife, who had helped acquire the materials and plan the logistics. Both Hernandez and Zuazo pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. DNA analysis confirmed that the men's DNA was present on the zip ties used to bind Sam in the basement. Blood traces found on their clothing matched Sam's DNA. Investigators were also able to track down the origins of the magnetic DTE signs that had been affixed to their truck. The signs had been custom-made by a Detroit graphic artist and business owner. When the business owner heard about the murder on the news and learned that fake DTE signs had been used, he immediately came forward. He provided surveillance video from his shop, showing the customers who had picked up the order. The video showed Hernandez and his wife. The signs were later recovered from the home of Hernandez's mother-in-law, hidden but not destroyed. Video surveillance from a Lowe's home improvement store showed Hernandez and Zuazo purchasing duct tape and zip ties at a self-checkout station. The timestamps on the video placed the purchase shortly before the crime, further establishing premeditation. Additionally, text messages between Hernandez and Zuazo revealed explicit discussions about the attack, including the target, the method, and the expected payoff. In court, Zuazo's defense attorney attempted to shift blame entirely onto Hernandez. The attorney argued that Hernandez was the mastermind, motivated by financial struggles. Hernandez had been married to his wife for only a year, and according to the defense, he was desperate to buy a new house. The implication was that Zuazo had been coerced or manipulated into participating, but prosecutors had evidence that both men had actively participated in the assault, that both had struck Sam, and that both had ransacked the home. On October 3, 2025, a jury found both Carlos Hernandez and Joshua Zuazo guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder. Their sentencing is scheduled for December 9, 2025. Prosecutors are seeking life sentences without the possibility of parole. The Murray case highlights the vulnerability of elderly victims and the ease with which predators can exploit trust. Sam Murray opened his door to men posing as utility workers because he had no reason to doubt their credentials. The fake badges, the DTE truck, the professional demeanor, all of it was designed to bypass suspicion, and it worked. The only reason Linda survived is that the attackers believed she could not escape the duct tape bindings. They underestimated her will to survive. The case also underscores the role of digital evidence in modern investigations. Text messages, surveillance video, DNA analysis, and financial transaction records all contributed to the rapid identification and conviction of the suspects. Without Ring doorbell footage, the investigation might have taken weeks or months. Without the text messages, the involvement of Hernandez's wife might never have been discovered. Technology has made certain kinds of crimes harder to conceal, but it has also made certain kinds of planning easier. Hernandez and his wife coordinated the attack using their phones, never imagining that those same devices would provide the evidence that destroyed their defense. While the Murray case was unfolding in Michigan, a very different tragedy had occurred 2 years earlier in Tampa, Florida, a case that would raise questions about domestic violence, child safety, and the credibility of defensive claims. Jayla Lavia Bass was born on November 26, 2016. At the age of 5, she lived with her parents, Jermaine Lavanda Bass and Shirley Princess Bass, and her 8-year-old brother JJ, in the Armature Gate townhomes in Tampa. Jayla was a kindergartner at Piso Elementary School and enjoyed being a mini cheerleader. She was energetic, playful, the kind of child who brought light to those around her. On August 29, 2022, Shirley called 911 from their home in the 13,000 block of Heritage Club Drive to report a shooting. When officers arrived, they found Jayla in the bunk bed she shared with her brother, dead from multiple gunshot wounds. JJ had also been shot but was alive. He survived the attack, but he now lives with a bullet lodged in his head, a permanent reminder of the night his sister died. The gun used in the shooting was still in the children's bedroom, along with 5 spent shell casings. The weapon belonged to Jermaine Bass, the children's father. Jermaine told investigators that he had been trying to unload the magazine when the gun accidentally discharged 5 times, striking both of his children in the head as they slept. The explanation was immediately implausible. Accidental firearm discharges do occur, but they are almost always single-shot incidents. A gun does not accidentally fire 5 times. Each discharge requires a deliberate action, a pull of the trigger. Investigators were not convinced. Jermaine was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against him was damning. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Jermaine holding his son JJ, who had been shot in the head. When officers asked if anyone else was injured inside the home, Jermaine said no. But Jayla was lying dead upstairs in the bunk bed. Jermaine had not mentioned her. He had not checked on her. He had not attempted to help her. The omission suggested consciousness of guilt, an awareness that Jayla was beyond help, that what had happened was not an accident. Crime scene photos contradicted Jermaine's account in multiple ways. The positioning of the shell casings, the angle of the bullet wounds, the lack of any mechanical malfunction in the firearm, all of it pointed toward an intentional act. Prosecutors argued that Jermaine had deliberately shot his children while they slept. The motive was unclear, but the evidence of premeditation was strong. At trial, the jury heard testimony from forensic experts, from law enforcement officers who had responded to the scene, and from family members who described the children and the family dynamics. Jermaine was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree attempted premeditated murder, and aggravated child abuse. During the sentencing phase, family members read victim impact statements describing the loss of Jayla and the ongoing trauma suffered by JJ. Jermaine showed no emotion. He did not cry. He did not apologize. When given the opportunity to address the court, he spoke briefly, but he never mentioned Jayla by name. He referred only to an accident, never acknowledging his daughter or the life he had taken. The judge sentenced Jermaine Bass to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case left the community struggling to understand how a father could kill his own child, how a man could shoot 2 sleeping children and then claim it was an accident. Prosecutors never definitively established a motive, which is not uncommon in cases of familial violence. Sometimes the reasons are buried in untreated mental illness, financial stress, or domestic conflict. Sometimes there is no reason that makes sense to anyone outside the mind of the perpetrator. What is clear is that Jayla Bass was murdered by her father, and her brother JJ will carry the physical and psychological scars of that night for the rest of his life. The Bass case is a reminder that danger for children often comes from within the home, from the people they are supposed to trust most. It also highlights the importance of forensic analysis in distinguishing between genuine accidents and fabricated explanations. Without the careful documentation of the crime scene, without the expert testimony about the mechanics of firearm discharge, Jermaine might have succeeded in framing the shooting as a tragic accident. Just as the Bass case exposed violence within a family, another case in South Carolina revealed systemic failures that allowed a repeat offender to remain free long enough to commit murder. Logan Haley Federico was born on January 20, 2003, to parents Stephen and Melissa Federico. She was raised in Waxhaw, North Carolina, a small town near the South Carolina border. Logan was described as energetic, strong and fun-loving, someone who never hesitated to stand up for the underdog and causes she cared about. At the age of 22, she was attending South Piedmont Community College, pursuing a degree in education with the goal of becoming an elementary school teacher. She was also working 2 jobs, a testament to her work ethic and determination. On May 3, 2025, Logan was visiting friends in Columbia, South Carolina, about an hour and a half from her home in Waxhaw. That night, she and her friends went out before returning to her friend's home on Cypress Street in the Old Shandon neighborhood. They went to sleep, unaware that a predator was prowling nearby. Alexander Devontae Dickey, a 30-year-old man with a long criminal history, broke into a nearby home that night and stole a firearm, a wallet, and keys to the owner's vehicle. After leaving that home, Dickey targeted the house where Logan was sleeping. Armed with the stolen gun, he burst into the home and entered Logan's bedroom. He attacked her, dragging her out of bed and forcing her to undress and kneel on the floor. Logan begged for her life. She pleaded with Dickey to let her go, but he executed her. After killing Logan, Dickey fled the scene with her debit and credit cards in the stolen vehicle. He went on a shopping spree, using Logan's cards at multiple locations. As he drove near Gaston, South Carolina, he crashed the stolen car. He then forced his way into a nearby home and attempted to set it on fire before police were able to extract him through a window. Dickey was arrested, and investigators quickly linked him to Logan's murder. Dickey's criminal history was staggering. He had been arrested 39 times and had 25 felony convictions dating back over a decade. His crimes included burglary, theft, assault, and other violent offenses. The question that haunted Logan's family and the community was simple. Why was Dickey free to commit murder? The answer lay in a series of systemic failures. In early 2024, Dickey had been released from prison after serving only 22.5% of his 5-year sentence for a first-degree burglary charge. That charge had been downgraded to third-degree burglary for reasons that remain unclear. The judge who approved Dickey's early release was Bentley Price, who became known in South Carolina legal circles as Judge Catch and Release. Judge Price had a pattern of granting lenient sentences and approving early releases for repeat offenders. In Dickey's case, the judge's decision was compounded by another failure. Dickey's criminal record, which should have included all of his prior burglary convictions, was incomplete. Other law enforcement agencies had failed to enter critical data into the state's criminal justice database. If that data had been entered, Dickey's rap sheet would have shown a clear pattern of escalating criminal behavior, and he most likely would have been sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison. Judge Bentley Price was eventually ruled unqualified by the South Carolina Bar and was not renominated to the bench. He vacated his position in June of 2024. In September of 2025, the South Carolina Supreme Court rebuked Judge Price over a separate case, citing his repeated failure to impose appropriate sentences and his disregard for public safety. But by then, Logan Federico was dead. Dickey is now facing 12 state charges in Richland County, including murder, 2 counts of first-degree burglary, and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. He also faces 23 additional counts in neighboring Lexington County for arson, burglary, and financial crimes. He is being held without bond and could face the death penalty. At this time, he remains in prison awaiting a trial date. Logan's father, Stephen Federico, delivered a powerful and heartbreaking statement in which he described his daughter's final moments. He asked listeners to imagine their own children coming home from a night out, going to sleep, and then being dragged from bed by a stranger. He described Logan begging for her life, calling for her father, who could not be there to protect her. He emphasized that Logan was 5'3" and weighed 115 pounds. She was small, defenseless, and terrified. Stephen noted that Dickey, with his 39 arrests and 25 felonies, should have been in prison for over 140 years. Instead, Dickey had spent a little over 600 days in prison over the course of 10 years. He was committing an average of 2.65 crimes per year since the age of 15, yet the system had repeatedly released him. Stephen's statement was a scathing indictment of a justice system that prioritized rehabilitation over public safety, that allowed a violent repeat offender to remain free, despite clear evidence that he could not be rehabilitated. The Federico case raises fundamental questions about bail reform, sentencing guidelines, and judicial accountability. How many chances should a repeat offender receive before society acknowledges that rehabilitation has failed? What responsibility do judges bear when they release dangerous individuals who go on to commit murder? These are not easy questions, and they do not have simple answers. But Logan Federico's death makes clear that the consequences of judicial leniency can be measured in lives lost. The final case we will examine occurred in 2010 in North Carolina, and it illustrates how peer pressure, substance abuse, and a failure to intervene can turn a house party into a death sentence. Michael Scott Rogers was born on November 21, 1993. At the age of 16, he lived in Transylvania County, North Carolina. On the night of February 20, 2010, Michael's friend, Krista Richards, asked him to accompany her to a house party so she wouldn't have to go alone. Michael agreed. The party was being hosted by 19-year-old Scott Fizer at his parents' home on Holiday Drive in Henderson County while they were out of town. The party was secret, unsupervised, and involved underage drinking and drug use. Michael had allegedly begun drinking before he arrived, and by the time he got to the party, he was already intoxicated. As he continued drinking, he became belligerent. His behavior began to annoy the other partygoers. He was telling people that he had been in 2 mental institutions and was addicted to drugs. It is unclear whether any of this was true or whether Michael was simply drunk and exaggerating. At around 11 p.m., Michael called his mother and stepfather and asked them to come pick him up. A few minutes later, he called back, crying, and said, "They done beat the hell out of me. I'm laying here and bleeding all over, and I just pray to God they don't come back and kill me." Michael's mother was alarmed. She spoke with Scott Fizer, who agreed to drive Michael to the Blantyre Baptist Church a quarter-mile away where she could meet him. She also called 911 and asked the sheriff's department to send a deputy to the church. But when Michael's mother and the deputies arrived at the church, no one was there. Deputies began searching for Michael, starting with the Fizer home. They did not find Michael, but they did find blood drops and a bloody towel inside the house. Deputies contacted Scott's father, Sean Fizer, to ask about Michael's whereabouts. Sean said that his son had called him and told him he had dropped Michael off at the end of the driveway. But Michael was not there. Deputies still had not been able to contact Scott, who had left the home and not returned. On a second call with Sean Fizer, he told the deputy that his son might be with a woman named Ashley, who drove a silver Volkswagen and lived in an apartment on King Street in Brevard, North Carolina. Officers rushed to the apartment, arriving shortly after 3 a.m. They found the silver Volkswagen and observed blood spatter and bloodstains inside the car. Inside the apartment, they found several people, including Scott Pfizer and a man named Richard Thomas. Both Thomas and Pfizer were questioned by police. Thomas told investigators that Michael had been driven to an area near Highway 64 and King Road, then taken to Grove Bridge just over the Henderson County line. Pfizer initially said that Michael had walked away near the intersection, but he eventually admitted that they had driven to a boat access area where they continued beating Michael before leaving him in the cold. Pfizer told investigators that Michael had arrived at his house in a wild state. He said a brief fight had broken out between Thomas and Michael. Thomas had allegedly hit Michael, knocking him over a railing and causing a cut lip. Pfizer then admitted that he had punched Michael numerous times, even as Michael was in and out of consciousness on the floor. Another partygoer, Coleman Hall, had also allegedly participated in the beatings. Pfizer's father had arrived at the home after Pfizer's uncle called him and told him that he had seen Michael on the ground beaten and that Michael needed to be removed from the house. That is when they put Michael in a vehicle, supposedly to take him to meet his parents. 2 witnesses later reported seeing Hall and Pfizer hitting Michael near the boat access and said they even threw rocks at his head. The vehicle carrying Michael included Coleman Hall as the driver, Scott Pfizer as a passenger and 2 females. Instead of going to the church to meet Michael's parents, they drove about half a mile down Grove Bridge Road to the Blantyre Bridge and boat access. Once there, they forced Michael out of the vehicle and beat him again. They then left him shirtless with no cell phone in near-freezing temperatures. After abandoning Michael, some members of the party burned their clothes in order to destroy evidence. Late the next morning, officers found Michael's body in a hog pasture off Grove Bridge Road. He was muddy, wearing jeans but no shirt. The medical examiner could not identify a single injury that caused Michael's death. However, the examiner determined that hypothermia was the cause, exacerbated by alcohol and non-fatal injuries. Although alcohol was present in Michael's system, no illegal drugs were detected. There were no injuries to the brain, no bone fractures, and no internal injuries. Toxicology showed a blood alcohol level of 0.06 and a urine alcohol level of 0.15, a pattern consistent with declining blood alcohol by the time the samples were taken. While many individuals were involved in the events that led to Michael's death, only one person was arrested, Scott Pfizer. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter in January of 2011. In May of 2012, he was found guilty and sentenced to 19 to 23 months in prison. Many people felt that others should have been charged as well, including Coleman Hall and Richard Thomas. Since Michael's death, Coleman Hall has been in and out of jail on unrelated charges, but he has never been charged in connection with Michael's death. Michael's family created a garden memorial in his honor, which was damaged by a hurricane in 2024. However, someone with a kind heart restored the cross and added additional memorial items. The Michael Rogers case is a stark reminder of how quickly a situation can spiral out of control, how peer pressure and substance abuse can create conditions where a vulnerable person is targeted and abandoned. It also highlights the difficulty of prosecuting cases where multiple people share responsibility. Michael was beaten by several individuals, transported by others, and left to die by a group. But only one person was held legally accountable. These 5 cases, though distinct in their details, share common threads that reveal deep flaws in the American criminal justice system. In the Aaron Spencer case, a father was charged with murder for stopping a predator who had violated a court order and was abducting his daughter. The predator, Michael Fostler, had been released on minimal bail despite facing dozens of charges related to child sexual abuse. The judge who set that bail was the same judge presiding over Spencer's murder trial, creating a conflict of interest that the Arkansas Supreme Court acknowledged but refused to remedy. In the Hussein Murray case, 2 men exploited the trust associated with utility workers to gain entry into an elderly couple's home, where they murdered Sam Murray and assaulted his wife. The killers were quickly caught due to digital evidence, but the crime itself was facilitated by a simple deception, a fake badge and a fake sign. In the Jayla Bass case, a father shot his 2 children while they slept and then claimed the gun had accidentally discharged 5 times. The forensic evidence proved he was lying, But the case also revealed how domestic violence can be hidden behind closed doors until it explodes into tragedy. In the Logan Federico case, a young woman with her entire future ahead of her was murdered by a man who should have been in prison. Alexander Devonte Dickey had been arrested 39 times and convicted of 25 felonies, yet he was free because a judge approved his early release and because law enforcement agencies failed to properly document his criminal history. Logan's father's statement was a searing condemnation of a system that values the rights of criminals over the safety of innocent people. In the Michael Rogers case, a 16-year-old boy was beaten at a house party, driven to a remote location, beaten again and left to die of hypothermia. Multiple people participated, but only one was convicted, and his sentence was less than 2 years in prison. What do these cases tell us about justice in America? They tell us that the system is inconsistent, that it can be harsh toward those who act to protect their families and lenient toward those who prey on the vulnerable. They tell us that judges wield enormous power, and when they exercise that power poorly, people die. They tell us that digital evidence has transformed criminal investigations, making it harder to conceal crimes, but also revealing how much of our lives are documented and traceable. And they tell us that the most dangerous place for a child is often within their own home or within their circle of trust. These stories are not told to shock or sensationalize. They are told to inform, to provoke thought, and to honor the memories of those who were lost. Jayla Bass, Logan Federico, Michael Rogers, Hussein Murray, and the unnamed daughter of Aaron Spencer. All of them were victims of violence, and all of them deserved better from the institutions that are supposed to protect us. The cases also raise uncomfortable questions about vigilante justice. Aaron Spencer took the law into his own hands when he rammed Fosler's truck and shot him multiple times. Was he justified? Most people would say yes, that any father would do the same. But the law does not always align with our moral intuitions. The law requires that we trust the system, that we allow police and courts to handle threats. But what happens when the system fails? When a predator is released on a $5,000 bond? When a no-contact order is ignored? When a 14-year-old girl is being driven into the night by the man who raped her? At what point does self-defense become murder? And at what point does the failure of the justice system create conditions where parents feel they have no choice but to act? These are the questions that juries will grapple with, that appellate courts will review, and that the public will debate. But for the families of the victims, there are no debates, no appeals, no second chances. There is only the permanent absence of someone they loved, and the knowledge that the system, which promised to protect them, failed. As we conclude this examination of 5 criminal cases that span child abuse, home invasion, domestic violence, judicial failure, and peer violence, it is worth reflecting on what justice means. Justice is not only the conviction of the guilty, it is also the protection of the innocent. It is the system working as it should, intervening before tragedy occurs, holding dangerous individuals accountable, and ensuring that those who act in defense of their families are not treated as criminals. In too many of these cases, justice was delayed, denied, or distorted. Michael Fosler was free to abduct Aaron Spencer's daughter because a judge set his bail too low. Alexander Devonte Dickey was free to murder Logan Federico because a judge released him early and law enforcement failed to document his history. Jermaine Bass was able to shoot his children because no one intervened in what may have been a deteriorating domestic situation. Scott Pfizer and his friends were able to beat and abandon Michael Rogers because no adult was supervising the party, and because the criminal charges that followed were limited in scope. The common thread is failure. Failure to supervise, failure to document, failure to sentence appropriately, failure to intervene. And when the system fails, ordinary people pay the price with their lives, their freedom, or their peace of mind. These stories are difficult to hear, but they are necessary. They remind us that true crime is not entertainment. It is a window into the darkest aspects of human behavior and the institutions that struggle to contain it. They remind us that every case involves real people, real families, real grief. And they remind us that justice is fragile, that it depends on the competence and integrity of judges, prosecutors, police officers, and jurors, all of whom are human and all of whom are capable of error. The families in these cases are left to pick up the pieces. Heather Spencer is raising money for her husband's legal defense while supporting her daughter's recovery. Linda Murray is grieving the loss of her husband while living with the trauma of the attack. Jayla Bass's family is mourning a 5-year-old girl who will never grow up. Logan Federico's parents are left with the knowledge that their daughter begged for her life in her final moments. Michael Rogers' family is still seeking accountability for the others who participated in his death. These families are not abstractions. They are real people living with real pain, and they deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a crime database, but as individuals who loved and were loved, who had dreams and potential, and who were taken too soon by violence that could have been prevented. As we close this documentary, we are left with no easy answers, no tidy conclusions. We are left with the weight of these stories, the responsibility to learn from them, and the hope that by examining what went wrong, we can make the system a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit more just. And we are left with the voices of the victims and their families, echoing through courtrooms and communities, reminding us that justice is not only about punishment, it is about protection, prevention, and the simple promise that when someone calls for help, the system will answer.